Hey everyone, welcome to Kingdom Builder TV. I'm your host, Jay Heilman. Thank you so much for joining us today on our first video broadcast for 2024. And I'm really excited about today's guest because in the over 15 years that I've been doing this show, I've never had anybody from this band join us. So imagine my excitement when we were able to land this interview today with lead vocalist Josh Havens from the Afters. Josh, how are you doing today, man?
Hey, doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, I greatly appreciate you joining us today. Like I said, I've been wanting to get you on here for quite some time and finally glad to make it happen. And Josh, the first question I have for you is the Afters, the name. I've read different things online, and of course, you can't always believe everything that you read on the internet, but a lot of
Oh,
people
you
may be
don't?
wondering. I try not to,
My
it's
mom, my mom tends to believe everything she reads on the internet. All the time. I'd be like, no, mom, you shouldn't believe that. No, so our name, actually, naming a band is hard. Um, People don't realize how tricky naming a band is. And maybe that's why there's so many kind of out there band names. Because when you think of a band name, you have to be the only one in the whole country with that name. So if there's ever been even a local band that has released music, if they have gone through the process of trademarking it and stuff, which a lot of them have, or if they've sold music outside the state, the laws make it so that you can't use that name in their market. So we originally were called something completely. We actually went through a few different band names, but about the time that we started talking to record labels, we were called Bliss. And when we got signed, their lawyers, our record labels, their lawyers looked into it and they found out that there was other bands called Bliss. So there's all these markets that we'd have to stay out of. And so we decided to go for a new band name. And so we would make these lists of names. And my name is Josh, right? And I mean, there's so many kids named Josh. I grew up, every classroom I was in was Josh. But with a band, you have to be the only one. So we'd go through these lists of names and just start writing them down, and then we'd start looking them up to see if there was other bands that had those names anywhere. And one name, the Afters, that got thrown on the list. It was actually thrown out by our friend Bart Miller, who sings for MercyMe. And he said, "Hey, I heard this term. I'm not sure what it means, but it sounds cool. Put the Afters on there." And so as we were going through all the names and kind of looking up meanings and seeing if there was other bands that had them, the Afters was one that stuck out to me because I love the meaning of it. And it's a term from the Middle Ages in kind of England, Ireland, the British Isles area. In the Middle Ages, they would have a class structure system where you had the nobles and the servants, the rich and the poor, and they never really mingled. And so you'd have the servants working big events for the rich, for the nobles, and it could be a wedding or a banquet or some kind of event like that. And to celebrate a job well done, the servants would have a celebration afterwards, a little party called the Afters. Well, the word got out among the nobles that that was more fun than their stuffy events, so they started slipping out and going to the Afters, which was in the servants' quarters. And it was the first time that there was a breakdown in that class structure where you had rich and poor, you had the nobles and servants dining together. So we love the idea of everyone's invited to the table. That's really what the Afters is, and that's what God's kingdom is like.
That's awesome. So would you say that being in the Afters is more fun than, being a part of any other band, right?
I think so. I think so. I'm biased, but I think so.
Well, I can think back to the first time I heard you guys in your music, and we're going way back to the year 2005 with your debut record, I Wish We All Could Win. And I very much enjoyed that album. And some of my favorites on that record included Beautiful Love, You, and still my personal favorite After song, Love Will Make You Beautiful. It's still, 20 years later, I still love that song. It was never a single, but
Wow.
it's was one of my favorites on that. And my thoughts after listening to that first record were these guys are going to have a great career if this is the kind of music they're going to put out. And I love it when I'm right. Sometimes my wife's like, Jay, you're not always right, but I was right about that. And since then, you guys have put out, five more amazing records over nearly the last 2 decades. But, going back to that debut record, what were your goals and aspirations when you guys were putting out a debut record?
We just wanted to make the best record that we could. And first off, thanks for all those kind words. Really appreciate that. It's been a
Sure.
fun journey. It's been a really fun journey. We were just great friends who loved making music together. We were a garage band in every sense of the word. Like we were just guys who would get together in a garage and make music. And then people started asking us, if we could put together music to play live. In fact, Matt and I, the first time we actually sang together was in a Starbucks where we were working together. So we were coworkers, and we would start making up songs there in the store. We were both worship leaders for different college groups, so we had guitars, and we pulled them out right there in the Starbucks, and we would start making up music right there in the store. And so for us, it was very organic. And then we get together, we get, go in one of our garages or studios, and we would just kind of jam out and make music and write stuff that we love to play. And our goal with making our first record was really just to make the best record that we could. And we put it out independently originally, and then a lot of those songs from our independent project ended up being on our first on I Wish We All Could Win.
Yeah, an amazing record. And as the years went by, you guys releasing more and more music. But with the first record, do you remember the recording process of that? I mean, do you remember
Yeah, it was
the first songs you recorded for that? I mean, what were your
yeah
favorite songs from that record? I mean, everybody has
first.
favorite songs, but which one would you say
Oh,
stood
sure.
out most on the first one?
Man, that was an exciting time because we started recording this record. A lot of the songs came from an independent project that we did under the name Bliss, our old band name Bliss. And our first experience with recording was going to Nashville. We were in this really cool studio in Berry Hill area of Nashville. And there was two sides to the studio. And MercyMe, they were the ones who really got us signed. They brought us to their label. Bart brought us to their label, and that's why we ended up signing with them. And they were working on a new record, so they had one side of the studio, and then we were working on our record, so we had the other side of the studio. And then we would switch back and forth depending on what tracking rooms we needed. So it was this really fun time to be in there with friends, and the atmosphere was so great and exciting, and just full of I don't know, optimism about this record that we were making. We had a lot of fun recording it. And then we got to work. So we worked with Dan Muckala in that studio, who's absolutely amazing producer. And then we got to work with a couple other guys. We worked with Brown Bannister. And Brown Bannister is an absolute legend of a producer. Some of my favorite Christian records growing up were produced by Brown Bannister. So when we had a chance to work with Brown, we were thrilled. And his recording process is really cool because he wants to see the artist come out. So he would really take time with us in developing parts, and wanted the songs on that record to be true to who we were as artists. He wasn't like a producer who would just produce out everything for you and give it to you and there's your project. No, he really wanted the band to speak, through the whole process. And that was a really special project to make with him.
That's awesome. Well, 2004, you mentioned MercyMe. That was back when it was I Know Records. It's Fair Trade now, but back when 2004, my favorite record from that year was Undone, MercyMe. And
Oh
then
yeah,
you guys released Wish We All
that
Could.
was the record that they were working on.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
phenomenal record. That's still that record and I Wish We All Could Win are still in my top 10 Christian albums of the last
thank
20
you.
years. I mean, that's awesome. But your second record, your sophomore effort, whenever you go to make a second record, you're always like, okay, how can we build upon and make something even greater than the first thing we put out? And that's where Never Going Back to Okay came out. And that record's actually considered by a lot of fans as your most popular. Of course, I remember first getting the pre-release for that record, and the label's like, you have to listen to this song. It's called MySpace Girl. You have to listen to this. It's a great song. And they
Yeah,
really pushed that because MySpace was a huge thing back then.
it was huge. Yeah, it was like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or any of those. It was the biggest thing on the internet.
Yeah, and like the title track for that record was an amazing one. Then you had Ocean Wide. Was there any kind of sense of urgency to, not only be able to put out the second record, but in a way, kind of be able to, build upon the success and popularity of the debut record?
Well, the interesting thing about making a sophomore record is you have your whole life to write for your first record. You can pull from old songs, ideas, but then you have basically a couple of years to write your second one. And so it's a much faster process. But we worked again with Dan Muckala, and a little bit with Brown Bannister. Mostly Dan did that record. And it was a fun process again. We had a really fun creative flow. I remember there's times we would go into the studio and we work until, 4 a.m. We were young and full of energy and excitement, and that was a really fun record to write and to record. Um, I also remember that MySpace Girl thing was crazy because we wrote this song as a joke, and then they were like, "Oh no, we want you to record it." But it was kind of a joke because when we were out on tour, our bass player at the time, he met this girl who was friends with another band that we were touring with called Sanctus Real, and they hit it off at the show and started talking. And afterwards, he was so frustrated that he didn't like get her information and find out more about her. He was like, I think she's the girl I want to marry. And we were like, dude, that's so creepy because you don't even know her. He was like, well, I'm going to hit her up on MySpace. So he goes on MySpace and sends her this whole message about, how he hasn't been able to stop thinking about her. And so she messaged back. And so they ended up, having a relationship, ended up getting married.
Oh, wow.
They now have twin girls. They've been married for almost 15 years now. And it's been cool to see that journey. But it was a joke that we wrote, to send to him about he and his wife. And then when the label wanted to put on the record, we were like, okay, yeah. I mean, MySpace is the biggest thing on the internet. And then it was like within a year or two, it was gone.
Yeah.
Like there was no more MySpace. It was like people didn't even know what it was anymore. It went away so fast.
That's
But
great.
yeah, some of the songs on that record, Never Going Back to Okay is still probably one of my kids' favorite songs. They love Never Going Back to Okay. They love Ocean Wide. And that's Ocean Wide is a song I still love to sing. Sometimes I'll put it, we have this little acoustic part of our concerts that we do. And sometimes I'll slip that in there as one of the songs that we do.
Yeah, it's a great song, and I think the record that followed that, "Light Up the Sky," I think that's probably one of another
Mm.
favorite of mine with the title track from "Light Up the Sky." In fact, I was listening to it last night. I was showing my wife the song. I'm like, I'm interviewing these guys tomorrow, and she's like, "Wow, I really like this song. It's like got a great message, but it's very catchy." And
Mm.
it kind of goes on to, you got "Light Up the Sky," you got "Life is Beautiful" after that. Um, and looking back on the early days of the band and the first couple records, is the approach to writing and recording a new project the same? I mean, what kind of differences might we find when you're prepping for an album
Sure.
in the early days compared to now?
Well, we were young. We were kids when we first started. We were just out of high school when we started the band. And we were like an alternative grunge band, basically. That's what was really popular at the time. And so very guitar heavy, alternative music, especially in our first two records. And then as we get older, we start, I think it's natural for a band to start exploring and trying different things. And we had two of our original members who realized that touring wasn't for them after those first two records and moved on. And so it was kind of this new season for our band. And I had a life experience that kind of gave me a new perspective on life. And that was a huge car accident that my family and I were in, where we were in Colorado and a car pulled out in front of us on the highway. And I slammed on my brakes, but it was so cool. I ended up hitting him and we went off the road, flipped over, ended up upside down in a ditch out in the middle of nowhere. And
Mm.
that moment, all of us walked away from that accident, but we shouldn't have. Like it was a gnarly wreck. And uh, I remember walking away from that with just this new perspective on life, like a freshness in seeing the world. And really, it was in that moment that I was like, I just want to do this for Jesus, And I think before that, I wanted to do it for Jesus, but when you're young and you're new and naive, and there's all these other things, that you're looking at too, and there's fame and success that becomes a part of it, and you want those things. And I feel like when I wanted success the most and cared about it the most is when things came the hardest. And then when I honestly could care less about it, and I just felt like, God, I just want to be in your will. I want to tell people about you. Music's an avenue that you've given us to do that, and we just want to be faithful to you. And when we had this new perspective on it, it was like that's when God blessed it the most. And so the Light to Sky record, that was that was an important record for us. It did a lot of cool things for us, and it was our first #1 song at AC radio, and it opened up a lot of cool avenues and opportunities. But it was really a time in the band when we kind of evaluated what was important and what our focus was going to be, and we wanted to be focused on Jesus and ministry, and so that kind of was the start of this new era for our band.
Amen. Well, as far as songwriting goes, what comes first for you guys? Is music come first, lyrics come first, a mix of it? I mean, how do you guys approach that when you're
You know,
recording?
it's always different. Sometimes you have a melody that you have in your head, and you bring that into the session, or sometimes a song just comes out. There's songs like there's a song called "Life Is Beautiful" that came out in like 20 minutes, and it was all just real fast. It just kind of came. It was almost like you just grasped it out of the air, and then all of a sudden there was this song. Some songs you bang your head up against the wall trying to finish, and you just can't get the right second verse or the right bridge, or you're just missing something. And there's songs that, like there's a song called "Moments Like This" that we had a lot of the song, but there was something not quite right about it, and then we ended up finishing it right before it almost didn't make the record, and we finished it right before the record was done, and then finished recording it, and it was on the record. So some songs you labor over, some songs just kind of come easily. And I don't think that one is necessarily better than the other. It's just a different part of the creative process. And it's amazing to me. Songwriting is amazing to me, how you can have something that never existed before, and then you have this creative moment where this song comes out, the lyrics come out, and the melody comes out, and then you have this piece of music that never existed. It's really cool. And then to see the life of that, how this piece of music can go on to impact people. I mean, I think about my life. I can define my life by different songs throughout my life, right? That I listened to, that songs that were my soundtrack, that were important in different seasons of my life. And to see your songs become that for other people is one of the coolest things.
So speaking of songs that have, really impacted you, obviously as an artist, as a songwriter whose goal is to, not only glorify and honor God and lift up the name of Jesus with the music that you write, obviously you're the
Mm-hmm.
same. You want that same encouragement when you listen to music. Can you think of, maybe
Mm,
a couple songs over the last, 2 decades with the band that has really kind of ministered to you and be like, oh wow, this is something that came along right when I needed it. Can you
yeah.
think like of those songs that kind of impacted you personally?
Well, the Delirious Metamorphosis record was a big album for me early on in our band life. Um, Came out when we were still independent, and that record was so creative and so beautiful. And it showed us kind of example of what a Christian band could do. Like, it took a lot of creative liberties, and I don't know, we loved it. I've always been a big Radiohead fan. And to me, that was like, okay, it had some Radiohead vibes to it, and but just a beautiful record. I still love that record to this day. And that was I can look back on that season of life, and that was a big soundtrack to my life during that season.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Delirious because I did, Martin Smith is an amazing songwriter, but
Oh,
me as a
amazing.
guitarist, I've been playing guitar for almost 3 decades now, and I got a chance to interview Stu G years
Oh,
ago,
I
and
love Stu.
that was like a fanboy moment for me. I'm like, dude, I'm sitting
Yeah,
here talking to this like one of the best guitarists. I mean, this guy is
yeah.
amazingly creative, and he brushes it off like, yeah, no big deal. But the dude,
Yeah,
the
he's so humble.
dude's amazing. Yeah, he's such a cool
Yeah, we
guy.
he's become a good friend, and through the years we've gotten to know Stu, and we actually had him play on a couple of our records. We brought him
Yeah,
in to we love his guitar playing so much, and so there was a couple records that we had where we asked him if he could come in and throw down a couple things. So
that's cool.
he's awesome.
So talk about like recording process. Obviously, songwriting is a big part of that, but just the technology has changed the way albums are recorded now. I mean, if I could travel back in time, you could travel back in time and tell 2005 Josh Havens, hey, you're gonna be able to record an entire record on your cell phone in
Yeah.
5 states, and it's gonna sound just the same as if you were all in a studio together
Yeah.
doing traditional live recording. What would you have said to that if, you would have had a visitor from the future say, "Hey, in the future, you're gonna be able to do all this with the phone in your hand."
I know. I mean, technology came on fast. And I remember even in our early recording days, we'd go into a studio, you'd have tracking rooms, you'd all track simultaneously. Then you do some overdubs and stuff, but it was still our first recording experiences were very much the old school approach of going into a studio and tracking everything. Nowadays, like you said, it all happens on laptops. And I mean, we have our producers will have studios in their homes usually, um, but so much of it is done. Like, I don't know how many vocals I've done where I've tracked them on the road, or tracked them in a bus, or been home and just needed to get a vocal, so I cut a vocal and sent it in. Or guitar parts. Our guitar player nowadays, he can just at home, in his home, record guitar parts that we need and send them in, and you can't even tell. Like, they sound fantastic. So you're right. Now, I think we did see that technology was changing fast, and we would even joke about, oh, someday, studios won't even be around because everybody can do it on a laptop, and that's definitely happened to some degree.
Yeah, and,
You've
it's
and now you have kids making amazing music, literally in their bedrooms.
which is crazy. I mean, the technology is like it's sometimes it's gotten a little too advanced because by the time I learn a new technology, I'm like, my kids are like, "Oh, do you see this?" I'm like, "No, I just finished learning this over here." Okay,
Yeah,
now, and they're mentioning AI. I'm like, so is the AI just gonna record the projects for you guys now? I mean, like, but
that's what's going to be next. They won't even need us.
they won't even need us anymore. Well, so
No, they won't need us.
this may be a hard question. I mean, obviously, you guys have a lot of records to pick from, but it's one I ask a lot of our music guests. But looking back on the entire Afters catalog,
Hmm.
what would you say would be your favorite song or couple of songs that you've written
Mm.
and recorded as a band over the last 2 decades? I know
Oh,
that's
that's
like asking
yeah.
who your favorite child is,
Who your favorite child is? Yeah,
and it's
Daddy
like a
knows, but
trick
he ain't saying.
question. But yeah, can you think of maybe a couple songs that you guys have done over the last 20 years that
Yeah,
kind of stick out to you as your favorites?
yeah. So from our first record, I really love "Beautiful Love." Um, that song meant a lot to me. Wrote it for my wife back then. Uh, we were newlyweds, and that was a really sweet time. So I love that song. Again, that was a song that did unexpected things. That had a lot of crossover. Um, it ended up being a theme song for a show on MTV. Like, all these cool things that God did with it that we didn't expect. On our second record, like I mentioned, I love Ocean Wide. Still love to play that one. On the Light Up the Sky record, I love playing Light Up the Sky. We still play that in every show, and I love playing that one. It's a fun one to sing with a big room full of people. Um, what was after that one? The Life is Beautiful might be it'd be up there from my favorite song we've ever done. I love Life is Beautiful, the song, because again, it's very sentimental. It means a lot. Wrote it thinking about our kids, how we would come home and from tour, and we'd be all exhausted and tired, and then our kids would see us and their faces would light up, and no matter what stress was going on, like that, it would just melt away. And it was just giving thanks to God for all that. So love that song still to this day. There's a song on that record called This Life that I really love, and it's kind of a sleeper. It's the last song on the record, um, but it's one that I really like a lot. After that, we had, what was the record after that? It was
Hold
Live
on.
On Forever. That was a fun record to make too, because that was the first one that we recorded solely with our drummer producing, Jordan Malowski, and it was a whole different process doing it with him. It was so much fun, and it was a kind of a fresh new phase for us too. Um, and on that record, the last song is this little acoustic love song um, that I wrote for my wife called "When You're With Me," and I love that song a lot. And it's It's one I still play to my wife, you know, and that was a song also that came very fast. Um, just kind of wrote from the heart, and that came out. And then after Live On Forever, I'll Fear No More. Man, there's a lot of songs that I love on that one. It is hard to pick your favorites. I love singing I'll Fear No More because that was one that came literally out of a season where we needed to write that even for ourselves, like as an anthem to sing for what we were going through. Actually, we wrote it as our drummer was having a panic attack in the studio.
Mm.
And I've dealt with anxiety my whole life. Our drummer was dealing with it even right then, and we said, let's write an anthem for this. So that's a song that has continued to live on in a really cool way, and is still all over the world. We hear about people, even in countries, literally all over the world, who talk about that song to this day. And there's a song called Moments Like This. See, now I'm just going to go through a whole catalog, and I'm going to just tell you about all the songs. Moments Like This is one I love to play, and it's one that people have started using in Reels and TikToks and stuff. It's become a big Reels, has like 1.5 million Reels usage, and it's so cool when you see a song kind of take a life on that you never expected. And that was one that was never a single, but it did so much for our music and for the band. Because of the life that it took on outside of just being a radio song. And then we have some new songs that are unreleased that I've just loved playing so much. There's one called What God Is Gonna Do. It's a song that we wrote for our kids, and it's literally the things I want my kids to know that I think about them. And my favorite thing about being a parent is seeing what God is gonna do in your kids' lives. And so that's what this song is about. And I have a hard time singing it without tearing up. It's a beautiful song, and can't wait to release it here in the next few months.
That's amazing. And that kind of segues into, the most recent song that you guys released, the single that came out this past August called God Is With Us. Tell us about this song, and what you were wanting listeners to take away from that song.
Yeah, God Is With Us. It's a song that we hope would really help people with their faith journey, because I think we all reach points when we go through hard times, when we go through struggles. I'm talking the really hard stuff. When we tend to ask the question, "Where's God in this moment?" I know I've been at that place at different points in my life. I think most of us have. And if you look at Scripture, I mean, the Psalms are full of times when David was crying out and saying, "God, where are you right now?" And then he would say, "No, I see you." And he would go on to share about how he does see God in those places. Even Jesus on the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?"
Mm.
And we just wanted to call out those moments, because I believe those are times when I've seen people walk away from their faith. I believe that's the time when people tend to struggle in their faith. And so when we wrote that song, actually, we were working on a different song, and our guitar player had just come in from Texas, Matt, and he had been in the hospital with his wife. And she had recently been diagnosed with a cancerous lung tumor and had a surgery to remove half her lung. So he had just come from being in the hospital with her for the surgery, and then came to the studio working on this different song. And we could just tell he was struggling. And so we just stopped and started talking about his wife's situation. And he was like, "I don't understand it. My wife is one of the best people that I know. She would do anything for anybody. She loves the Lord with all her heart. She's a servant's heart. She's one of the best people. How could God let something like this happen to her?"
Mm.
And so we said, let's write that song. Where is God in these moments? And so we started looking through our lives and the moments that have made us ask those questions. And because I believe that God is present in those times. And then when I look back on my own life, even the hardest things, in the moment I had a hard time seeing it, but looking back in retrospect, I can see God's fingerprints and his presence in all of those hard times, and see all the amazing things he was doing along the way. And so our hope with the song was just to remind people as they're going through those things God is with you. He is present. He loves you. Um, Unfortunately, life doesn't always have a beautiful bow at the end of it. Life comes with a lot of suffering. A part of living, part of the human experience is suffering. We're all going to die. We're all going to experience loss. We're all going to have loved ones who leave this world, oftentimes even before we expect it. Um, but that doesn't mean that God isn't real, and that doesn't mean that God's not with us in the middle of those hard things. And
And,
so, yeah, our hope for it is that it would encourage people in their faith, and that they would see that God is present in those times.
I knew some of the background of that song. Um, but it's crazy how the Lord works things for his honor and glory. Things that we don't understand, things that happen in our lives that we don't understand.
Mm.
And sometimes, like you said, you don't always see God at work during those tough times. Oftentimes you see it later
Mm-hmm.
on, you look back and you're like, you know what? It didn't seem like God was walking with me during those
Mm.
tough times, but honestly, he was. And you see it kind of in the
Mm-hmm.
aftermath. And a perfect example, I got married in 2005 to my wife, Shannon. Um, so we got married probably around the same time. And unfortunately, COVID took her from us in 2021. So I look
Mm.
back at those times at the beginning, and when I first heard this song, I hadn't heard you tell this story yet, but when you're talking about Matt's wife and how she was going through that, and he was like wondering, how could this happen? This type of person she is, she would do anything for anybody.
Yeah.
That was my wife, and I had those same questions, and
Mm.
I battled that. That was something I really battled and stuff. And when I heard this song, I'm like, you know what? It reminded me, even in those times where it's like the footsteps in the sand poem, like those times where you don't think
Mm.
God's with you, he was carrying you that,
Mm-hmm.
that whole time. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize that. You don't see that when you're actually going through it, but I
Mm.
realized later on, I'm like, you know what? I would ask questions. Why was the biggest question I
Mm-hmm.
asked, followed by the question.
Mm-hmm.
And my pastor finally sat me down. He's like, you know what? You have to stop beating yourself up over all these why questions. He's like, you're asking God questions that he's never going to answer in your lifetime, but someday you'll understand why these things are
Mm-hmm.
happening. But know that in all of that stuff, God is still with you, still walking with you. He
Mm.
promised never to leave or forsake us. And, I love it when
Mm-hmm.
songs like this remind us that even when we go through the worst times in our life, God hasn't left
Yeah.
us, He's still walking right along with us like he had been the entire time. So I appreciate a
Mm.
song like that, because it came along for me at a time where I needed to hear that. So I appreciate that. It kind of leads into the next
Mm.
question. You mentioned that you have unreleased music and stuff, or 2019 was the last
Mm-hmm.
record we saw from the Afters. What's on the horizon for you guys as far as music goes?
Yeah, we have a lot of new songs that are coming out. First off, I just want to say thanks for sharing that about your wife. And man, I think that too, when we share those real things from our life, there's a lot of people that are helped by that. When we share our experience of walking through um, the grief and trauma of life, it's amazing when we speak those things out, how many people um, say, I'm going through that right now, or I've been through that. And um, yeah, so thanks for sharing that. But
Yeah.
Matt, with his wife, she found out after all the surgery stuff that uh, she has a condition now because of all that stuff that is a progressive lung disease that she'll have for the rest of her life. So it's one of those examples of it's not a good ending to the story. She's always going to struggle with this. Pending a miracle that God would work, which I believe God does miracles. Um, Pending that, she's going to have this with her forever. Now, does that mean that God is mad at her, or God is punishing her? No, no. And Matt would be the first to tell you this is really, really hard. This has been hard for our family, but God is with us in this. God is present in this. God is, and we've seen him work in so many ways. When my
Yeah.
dad passed away in 2004 from cancer, he was only 52. Um, he had a 2-year battle with cancer, and for a while it looked like he was going to be healed. And I thought, oh, answer to prayers, because I mean, we would literally get all of our friends surrounding him. and get, people laying their hands on him and praying over him. And so when he started to get better and the cancer went away for a season, we thought, wow, okay, prayers answered. My dad's healed, right? And then it came back with a vengeance. And he passed away in 2004. Really hard season for our family. I have two younger siblings that were very young during that time, and my mom, being widowed, she didn't have a career or anything. She'd always just been a house mom, and here now she is alone. It was a very hard season.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you a story that came out of it that showed me how God works in these situations. And that was during that time when my dad was sick, one of the things that was heavy on his heart was my older sister, Jennifer, away from her faith. She's an archaeologist. She had been working in Israel, scientist in the field, right? And she, over the course of studying archaeology, walked away from her faith and rejected Jesus, rejected the Bible. She thought the Bible was a bunch of fairy tales and stories, and that was heavy on my dad's heart as he was sick. And so he was praying that God would somehow use his last days as a way to minister to her. And so he gave his Bible that had all of his notes and his highlighted passages in it, gave it to her, and said, I know this doesn't mean anything to you right now, but I ask that you hold on to it, and maybe someday God will speak to you through it. And so after he passed, I mean, she never opened up that Bible, and over a decade went by, and she went through a season with her family where things were really hard, a really dark season for them, and she started having these dreams of Jesus. And in the dream, Jesus would say, follow me. And then she would wake up and she wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. And so I remember her telling me, I don't like this. I don't like seeing Jesus in my dreams. And then one night, it was so strong. She got up and walked to her living room, and she saw that Bible on the bookshelf for the first time since my dad had given her. She opened it up, and a passage that he had highlighted jumped off the page at her. And she said it spoke directly to what she was going through. So a couple nights, she went back to the Bible and kept reading. And then she started just reading the Bible. And I ended up getting a phone call from her. It was the middle of the night where she was living. And she said, Josh, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I believe in Jesus, and I want to give my life to Jesus.
Amen.
And so I prayed with her. And 3 months later, she flew out to Arizona where I live, and I got to baptize my sister. But all that was something that was started in this really hard time of grief, and time of loss of my dad. But God was still working. And here, I mean, my dad would have been so overjoyed if he'd known that moment, he in faith did this thing. He'd been praying for my sister, gave his Bible to her, and then to see how God does work through time. And now she's on fire for Jesus. And she lives in Israel with her Israeli husband, and they have a ministry there, reaching out to people, and sharing the gospel. And so to me, that just showed, okay, that was one example of how in the hardest time, God can turn things and make them beautiful. And he was using even this really hard moment to lead to something really beautiful for our family.
That's an amazing story,
So,
man. And it really is amazing how God can use a situation like that, and even mine, to make things more clear in the future and stuff. Why we don't understand it while we're going through it, we look back, like you said, and realize that God had a purpose for all of that. So that's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that story. And I'm looking at the last question here is, legacy of the Afters. You guys have been a band for 20 years now, and when the days of the band are long gone, what do you guys want fans new and old to remember the Afters for the most?
I love that question. That's awesome. I hope that people see that um, that we were authentic with the things that we wrote. That we wrote what we really believed. That we, I hope that people see that we were authentic in our faith. That we're guys who love our families well. Um, and I hope that people have found Jesus, and that God has used our music. Ultimately, our hope is that when we make music, that God uses it and does something that we can never do with it. And we've seen him do that time and time again. And so at the end of it, um, if all the music that we did, if it changed any lives, then I'm just grateful that we took that path. But making music just for the sake of music is pointless. It's fun, but making music that God then uses to impact lives and bring people to Him. I mean, that's eternal. So that's what we're about as a band. You know, we do a lot of stuff with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, and we've been a part of events all over the world. You know, from Mongolia to the outback of Australia and the Highlands of Scotland, you name it, all over Europe. Uh, and I've seen time and time again when people hear the gospel, when they hear about Jesus, feeling this freedom and coming forward and giving their lives to Jesus. That's why we do what we do. And so our hope is to see people turn to Jesus, see people find comfort, that only God can bring. We share our stories through our music. We try to be vulnerable and share the things that we're going through in our music, and hopefully God uses that to touch somebody else who's going through that same thing. So, but as far as legacy goes, it's all for Jesus, and I hope that we look back and see that we pointed people to Jesus through our career.
Amen. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. I greatly appreciate you by and sharing your stories with us today. And I'm just praying that the Lord will continue to work through the afters and everything that He's got planned for you guys in the future. So thank you so much for joining us, and
Jay, thank you.
I hope that you have a great 2024, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You too, man. Hope things are good down in Florida, and hope to meet you at a show sometime.